Hey Miracles, so here I am with a new video that explains all the laws those are used in respiratory physiology. So we'll be studying about respiration here. Only respiration we'll be figuring out. The first law is Poiseuille's-Hagen formula or Poiseuille's law. So this states that pressure or delta pressure is inversely proportional to r to the power 4. This is the radius. Okay, so here resistance will also be inversely proportional to r. That means resistance is also inversely proportional. That means if alveoli are smaller, the resistance should increase, right? But what here happens is there's overall resistance of small airways is very small. Now how we get into this? Here it is. With Poiseuille's-Hagen formula, Poiseuille's law, we might feel that smallest airways are the major site of resistance. However, the contribution by the smallest airways is very little to the overall total resistance. This is because the airway branches in each generation exist in parallel rather than in series. As a parallel branching increases, resistance total decreases. So the overall resistance of these small airways is very small. Okay. The next thing we have here is about oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. Okay. So what about this? The effect of PCO2 and pH on oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve is called Bohr's effect. Double Bohr effect occurring in the placenta. Now how and what is it? So oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve of fetal hemoglobin and maternal blood move in opposite direction. What is the mechanism it holds? So the fetal blood entering the placenta carries large amounts of carbon dioxide, but most of it diffuse from the fetal blood into the maternal blood. The fetal blood loss of carbon dioxide reduced hematocrit, so shift to the left, that is loading of oxygen, which is oxygenation of the fetal hemoglobin. Whereas maternal blood increase in carbon dioxide, increase in hematocrit, shift to the right, release of oxygen. As we have all known to the mnemonic, like left loves whereas right repels. Okay, so left loves means oxygenation, oxygen will be bound to it, whereas right repels means it will oxygen will be released. So this is the mnemonic we have studied on oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. Next is the Boyle's law. Where is it used now? At the end of inspiration, the alveolar pressure is 0 with reference to the atmospheric pressure. Whenever alveolar pressure equals atmospheric pressure, alveolar pressure is said to be 0. This happens when no air is moving in or out of the lungs. During inspiration, the diaphragm contracts, causing volume of the thorax to increase. So volume is increasing. Okay, as lung volume increases, the pressure in the lungs must decrease. Now must decrease. Why? Because of Boyle's law. Boyle's law states that P into V is constant at a given temperature. That means P is inversely proportional to V, and if here V increases, so P should be decreased. Halfway through the inspiration, the alveolar pressure falls below atmospheric pressure, that is -1 centimeter water. The pressure gradient between the atmosphere and the alveoli drives the airflow into the lungs. Until at the end of inspiration, alveolar pressure is once again equal to the atmospheric pressure, and the pressure gradient between the atmosphere and the alveoli has dissipated and airflow into the lungs ceases. During expiration, alveolar pressure rises to about +1 centimeter water. So here, this is the line we should be remembering. During inspiration, what happens? Okay. Next, we are going to this part where we'll be studying about the surfactant. Okay, so why is surfactant necessary in our lungs and how does it perform? So the surface tension generates a pressure that tends to collapse the sphere. Surfactant helps to prevent alveolar collapse according to law of Laplace. So what does this law of Laplace say? In accordance with law of Laplace, P is equal to 2T upon R, where P is collapsing pressure on alveolus, that is in dyne per centimeter square, or pressure required to keep the alveolus open, that also in dyne per centimeter square. The T here is surface tension, that is dynes per centimeter, and R is the resistance of the alveolus in centimeter. Collapsing pressure is inversely related to the radius. Large alveolus will have a low collapsing pressure and therefore will require only minimal pressure to keep it open. On the other hand, the small alveolus will have a high collapsing pressure and therefore will require more pressure to keep it open. So here we have to remember collapsing pressure is inversely proportional to the related radius. Again, we have came to an effect, that is the Haldane effect. What does this say? What does this Haldane effect say? So binding of oxygen with hemoglobin tends to displace carbon dioxide from the blood. So this effect is called Haldane effect, and this is important in promoting carbon dioxide transport. The Haldane effect results from the simple fact that the combination of oxygen with hemoglobin in the lungs causes the hemoglobin to become stronger acid. This displaces carbon dioxide from the lungs into the alveoli. This is a typo, that is typing error. This will be carbon dioxide. So this displaces carbon dioxide from the blood and into the alveoli. So here we have to remember that what we have to here remember is this is important in promoting carbon dioxide transport. The oxygen diffusion across the respiratory membrane, this is the blood vessel, this is the alveolar membrane. Now the diffusion across the respiratory membrane is governed by Fick's law of diffusion. Fick's law of diffusion. Amount of oxygen transported, amount, here we are quantifying it. So the amount of oxygen transported in dissolved form is calculated by Henry's law, which says that the amount of gas dissolved is directly proportional to the partial pressure of the gas with which it is in the equilibrium. So these are the two laws which states, the first one is the oxygen diffusion across the respiratory membrane. Okay, this is governed by Fick's law, and the second one is the amount of oxygen transported in the dissolved form, that is calculated by Henry's law. We'll be discussing a very good topic of nitrogen narcosis. This is here we will be understanding various laws that actually explains this phenomena, nitrogen narcosis. So nitrogen narcosis is due to increased solubility of nitrogen in a nerve cell. So the concept here is below the sea level, atmospheric pressure increases at the rate of 1 atmospheric pressure for every 33 feet depth. According to Boyle's law, as pressure increases, volume will decrease. Pressure increases, volume will decrease. Hence, lungs tend to collapse. To prevent this, to keep lungs expanded, gas is delivered at a high pressure to the lungs. According to Dalton's law, nitrogen contributes the maximum to barometric pressure, and hence the amount of nitrogen entering the alveoli increases. Henry's law states as the partial pressure of nitrogen in the alveoli increases, its concentration in the blood also increases in dissolved form. So nitrogen is 5 times more soluble in fat compared to water. As a result, nitrogen dissolves in fatty substances in neuronal membranes, and because of its physical effect on altering ionic conductance through the membranes, it reduces neuronal excitability and produces the narcotic effect. Nitrogen narcosis has characteristics similar to those of alcohol intoxication, and for this reason it has frequently been called as ruptures of the depths. So here we have to understand that nitrogen dissolves in fatty substances in neuronal membrane, and because of its physical effect on altering ionic conductance through the membranes, it reduces neuronal excitability and produces the narcotic effect. The two reflexes we'll be studying here are, the first is Herring-Brewer inflation reflex. This says that prolonged inspiration inhibits further inspiration. The reflex plays a protective role, preventing the overinflation of lung rather than regulating the normal ventilation. Versus Head's paradoxical reflex is stimulated by hyperinflation of lungs. It refers to prolonged inspiration stimulating the further inspiration. Hyperinflation of lungs causes strong and long-lasting inspiratory effort, an effect opposite to Herring-Brewer inflation reflex. So, Herring-Brewer inflation reflex, what does it say? Prolonged inspiration inhibits further inspiration, whereas Head's paradoxical effect, as the name suggests, paradoxical. So this Head's paradoxical reflex says it refers to the prolonged inspiration stimulating further inspiration. Prolonged inspiration stimulating further inspiration. Okay, so this is it. These were all the laws, those were used in respiratory physiology. Tell me how you liked it and what else you want to get notes of. One page sufficient for you, not troubling you much. That's the goal. Thank you.